Okay. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We will be getting started now. So good afternoon and welcome to Beyond the Basics, Resources and Programming for the Deaf/Hard of Hearing Community, the most recent installment in the LTC Quarterly Speaker Series. My name is Samantha Oakley, and I'm a project director with ALA's Public Programs Office, and I lead the LTC initiative. Before I turn it over to our presenter, a few quick housekeeping items. Today's program includes programmatic accessibility features of American Sign Language, as well as real-time captioning. To view the captions, hover over the three dots found typically in the bottom right of your Zoom screen and select Show Captions. Our interpreters will be switching on and off every 15 minutes, and one of them should be in view at all times. If you encounter any accessibility barriers to participating, please let us know in the chat. Following the presentation, we will have time for Q&A. Please submit all questions through the Q&A feature found at the bottom as well for our team to review and sort. Please do not use the chat feature to submit questions for our speaker. Please know as well that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the LTC Grantee resource page following the session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Alicia Deal. Alicia is the Disability Inclusion Specialist and a former public service librarian at the Dallas Public Library. Alicia is also a 2023 Library Journal Mover and Shaker, ALA Emerging Leader, and former chair of the Bridging Deaf Cultures Interest Group, and is a fierce advocate for breaking down accessibility barriers. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Alicia.
Thank you. As she mentioned, my name is Alicia Dill, and Casey was supposed to present with me, but unfortunately they were unable to attend. But I do want to acknowledge them because they did work a lot on creating this PowerPoint and providing feedback on the presentation. And I'm also, hold on. Let's see if I can figure out how to get the slides to work. Okay. One of the things that we're going to do in the overview that I mentioned is we're going to introduce ourselves. And even though Casey is not here, I'm still going to introduce them because it demonstrates the diversity among those who are deaf and hard of hearing, and you get an idea of why it's so important to provide a variety of different accessibility tools and technology and everything for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. We will also discuss what is deafness and what is known as the culturally deaf. And something new that I only recently just learned about is something called auditory processing disorder. And I will discuss that and what that is and how it is relevant to this topic. We will also go over ways, preferred ways in which the deaf and hard of hearing community prefers to communicate, the ways in which you could accommodate us, and also some ideas for programming. And at the end, there's a list of resources that you can refer to help you in providing your services and programs to the deaf and hard of hearing community. So first off, I'm introducing myself. Casey and I wanted to provide background on our deafness. Again, it demonstrates the difference, how diverse our community is. And so for me, my hearing loss became noticeable while I was growing up in a small rural town. Even though it was noticeable, I continued to be mainstreamed in public schools and college without accommodations. In college, I also developed tinnitus, which is a ringing noise in your ear. You hear sound all the time. And I was also diagnosed with bilateral profound deafness. Bilateral means that I have deafness in both ears, and profound means that's little to no hearing. I received a cochlear implant pretty recently, 4 years ago. I began learning ASL, but I am not yet fluent in it. And it was only this year that I realized that I had ADHD and autism. And a lot of my hearing loss is actually related to something called auditory processing disorder, which is not exactly hearing loss. It's just, it affects how the brain understands and perceives sounds. So there's not anything wrong with the ear's ability to hear. It's what's wrong with the brain's ability to understand and interpret sound. And I'm going to discuss that more later. So this diagnosis basically complicates my hearing loss history because it may not be as profound as what I was diagnosed as, because there are some sounds that I can hear, even though I'm told I should not be able to hear them. So I'm really confused exactly the extent of my hearing loss. But I definitely have hearing loss because I cannot hear high frequency sounds. But moving on to my library background, I was a student assistant at the university I attended, at the library at the university I attended. I had majored in criminal justice and got degrees in criminal justice, but later I decided to change my career to focus on librarianship. I started working at the Dallas Public Library at the same time I was working on getting my master's in library science, which I received in 2021. And then I was promoted as a librarian actually a couple of months later in 2022. I was awarded the 2023 Advocate Movers and Shakers by Library Journal with KC for our advocacy work in promoting and uplifting the deaf, hard of hearing community in libraries. I was also awarded a part of the 2023 ALA Emerging Leaders Cohort. I also served as a chair for ALA's Bridging Deaf Cultures Interest Group and a former chair and chair-elect of the Peggy Barber Tribute Grant Committee. I also co-founded and served as the first president for Employee Resource Group for employees with disabilities with the city of Dallas, and Casey served as our first secretary. Casey was also very involved in the group as well. Currently, earlier in the year, I quit my job for personal reasons, for health reasons. And so right now I'm a part-time freelance editor and advisor. I'm working with a children's author to help promote their book campaign. And that's been a very interesting experience. I'm also a volunteer member of the U.S. Gender and Disability Justice Alliance. Moving on to KC. Now, KC, their hearing loss was noticeable at an even earlier age in which they were likely born hard of hearing. They started going to school at a deaf school where ASL is their first language. And so eventually, though, they were mainstreamed in a public school. And so that's very different from my experience, where I was never really exposed to ASL and I was mainstreamed the entire time, never given any kind of exposure to a deaf school, to other deaf people as a child. But Casey has that exposure. And this is important, again, which I'll discuss later. They've been in the field of librarianship a lot longer than I have. And they are currently one of the branch managers with the Dallas Public Library. They're also a temporary branch manager for another library branch. So they have a full plate. But they're very knowledgeable in librarianship and about deaf culture. They actually teach ASL, and they've had hosted programs teaching ASL. So moving on. So what does it mean to be deaf? What does deafness mean? So deaf means that a person has severe to profound hearing loss, which means that they have very little or no hearing. Hard of hearing refers to someone who has enough residual hearing that they can use an auditory device, such as a hearing aid or an FM system, to provide adequate assistance to process speech. There's also late deafened, which refers to an adult who became deaf as an adult. So they face different challenges than than someone who was born deaf or became deaf as a child. And this is also relates to verbal versus nonverbal. Those who are verbal, they speak and are more likely to identify as hard of hearing. Nonverbal are those who choose not to speak and most likely identify as a culturally deaf and use ASL. The thing about deaf people, even though all deaf people, they can be taught to speak. It's just that a lot of deaf people do not want to speak because they cannot hear themselves speak. But there's different schools that teach people how to speak and how to read lips. And so that's why I say that the person chooses not to speak. And they're nonverbal. And again, relating to prelingual versus postlingual. Prelingual means that those are people who became deaf or hard of hearing before they learned how to speak as a child. And they are likely nonverbal. And then postlingual are those who became deaf or hard of hearing after learning how to speak. And they are likely verbal. I became deaf, hard of hearing after learning how to speak as a child, so I prefer to speak. That's really the only thing I've ever known. But again, other deaf people who did not learn how to speak and they were born deaf or hard of hearing, or they experienced some illness or injury before they learned how to speak, that impacted their hearing, they most likely are not, they did not learn how to speak before they became deaf. If there's any confusion about anything, let me know. And something that I would also like to explain is that in the deaf community, we prefer the terms deaf or hard of hearing. We do not like the terms hearing impaired or hearing impairment. I know that it's used in a lot of medical and legal documents, and I know that it's used by the Library of Congress, but we do not like those terms because it focuses on what we can't do as opposed to what we can do. And so please, as much as possible, use deaf or hard of hearing when referring to the deaf community. And moving on. Okay, so now we're going to discuss what it means to be culturally deaf. This is someone who identifies as being deaf. They They are heavily a part of the deaf community. This would be Casey, because Casey was likely born hard of hearing and they had that exposure to a deaf school, and ASL is their first language. So they are involved in the deaf community and are culturally deaf. These people do not view deafness as a disability and dislike being labeled as hard of hearing. Um, the culture itself consists of a group of individuals who are usually born deaf or lost their hearing as a child before they learn how to speak, which they're prelingual, and who communicate with American Sign Language. And the deaf culture is both defined and bound by their deafness and their language. And I know that you've probably seen discussions of big D deaf versus little d deaf. The distinction is big D deaf, you use that when you are referring to the cultural deaf community. Little d deaf is all of those people who have severe to profound hearing loss, but they may not identify as culturally deaf because of the fact that they were not exposed to the deaf community and do not know ASL. I would be little d deaf because I have profound to severe hearing loss, but I do not know ASL and I have very little exposure to the deaf community. KC, on the other hand, again, they identify as big D deaf because they are part of that culturally deaf community in which they are fluent in ASL, and again, likely born deaf. So I'm hoping that you understand that, because I know that it gets confusing and when to know when to use those terms. Okay, now auditory processing disorder. This is something I did not know existed until I realized that I have ADHD and autism. And I want to discuss this because it is in reference to the ability to hear and understand what you're hearing. So auditory processing disorder is a condition in which the brain has challenges interpreting sound. The ear's ability to detect sound is not affected. Some of these symptoms are very similar to those who have deafness or hard of hearing. And that includes trouble with speech with background noise, frequent need for repetition during conversations, misunderstandings and communication delays, and greater reliance on visual cues such as lip reading and body language. However, the differences are that the auditory processing disorder, APD, it affects processing, not sound detection. And while deafness involves problems detecting sound from your ears. And there's also inconsistency. APD, it varies by environment usually. If it's a quiet environment, they can hear sound. If it's a loud background, they cannot really understand what they're hearing. And deafness impacts all sound perception. And this condition is common among those who are neurodivergent, people with ADHD or autism, as well as people with stroke or traumatic brain injury. And so, again, the importance of introducing this, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people do not know about because I did not know about it and I actually have it, is that it is very important to apply universal design in your programs and services, because even though you think that ASL and captions is something only for deaf and hard of hearing people, it's actually relevant for a lot of other people, especially in the neurodivergent community, such as those with ADHD and autism. And it's very helpful for them as well. So again, the programs and services and accommodations discussed in this presentation are also helpful for those with APD and sensory sensitivities that are commonly found among those with ADHD and autism and other types of neurodivergent condition. I also wanted to mention before I forget is that APD is actually can be a comorbid condition with other types of hearing loss, which is the case with me. And treatments are also similar, sometimes similar with the deaf and hard of hearing community, which includes speech therapy and using assistive hearing devices. So, moving on with the ways in which deaf and hard of hearing people communicate and in which you can communicate with us. One of the most common ways is lip reading, which is also known as speech reading, and it is a technique of understanding speech by visually interpreting the movements of the lips, face, and tongue when normal sound is not available. It relies also on information provided by the context, knowledge of the language, and any residual hearing. So most people with normal hearing process some speech from sight of the moving mouth by lip reading. This is especially done by those who are ADHD and autistic. They may have normal hearing, but they also process sound from lip reading as well. However, even the most skilled lip readers can usually understand only 30 to 40% of speech through this method. And this is because the English language contains many different lip shapes and patterns, as well as speech sounds that have identical mouth movements, such as P and B. There's so many similarities. And for me, as someone who lip reads, I rely on a combination of hearing the sound as well as seeing the lip movement. And without hearing the sound, a lot of the time, I cannot understand what is being said because the lip shapes are so similar to each other. So lip reading is not always the most accurate. And this is because lip reading depends on a lot of different variables, including your previous hearing. If you were born deaf and never heard sound, you're not going to be familiar with how, this is supposed to sound, how your lips are supposed to move or anything like that. It also depends on hearing devices, and usually also how early you receive those hearing devices. Being able to interpret gestures and contextual clues. This is like, that if you're talking about a dog or something like that, you're not, if you understand the context, like you're, in a dog park, you will know that they're talking about a dog and not something else entirely. So at least hope not. So you really look at the environment that you in, the gestures that the person is using in order to interpret what is being said. Good lighting, we really rely on good lighting. If it's dark, if we can barely see your mouth or face or anything, it makes it difficult to lip read. You have to speak in a clear, normal pace. Do not speak too slow, because that's not going to help us in lip reading. Do not speak too fast either. I've actually had people come up to me as soon as I told them that I was deaf or hard of hearing. They slowed down their speech, and it was very and it was not helpful. So do not do that when encountering a deaf person. Um, and again, your mouth has to be clearly visible. People who wear mustaches and beards, it is very difficult to read their lips, because the hairs obscure the lips and our ability to see the lip patterns and everything. So because of this, lip reading is mostly guesswork. And so it is best to just ask how we prefer to communicate instead of making assumptions. So in terms of training staff or for your own personal usage, it's important that you remember that your face is not blocked by anything, and this includes phone headsets and things like that, because it also impacts our ability to read lips. Make sure that your hand is not covering your mouth, and that you face the person directly. You can, in terms of maintaining eye contact, like some of us, like me, I'm neurodivergent. I feel uncomfortable with eye contact, but I still want the person looking in my direction. I just do not necessarily need them staring me down. So one thing that helps is either you focus on their lips or you look past them and focus on their ears, because some people do feel very uncomfortable with eye contact. So you do not necessarily just need to stare the person down to show that you are paying attention to them and that you are you know, showing them the respect of looking at them so they can read your lips. And also use facial expressions and gestures to convey meaning. If you need to pointing helps me so much. It helps provide that context as to what is going on. So if you need to, you can point, and that kind of thing. If you're not familiar with sign language though, I do not recommend that you try using sign language. Just be able to use, again, just minor little gestures to convey meaning, again, like pointing. And again, do not speak too slow or too fast. Speak at a normal pace. The next one is sign language. And again, this is not how most deaf, hard of hearing people communicate. That's only for those who've had that exposure to sign language. Most of us are not provided that exposure because we continue to be mainstream. We are born or grow up in isolated communities that do not have a large deaf population, so we're not exposed to that culture. But the best way for deaf people to communicate actually is sign language. And sign language is a manual communication style commonly used by people who are deaf. The gestures or symbols in sign language are organized in a linguistic way. It is its own language. It's not just people just, wildly gesturing or something. It is a language because it does have grammar, syntax, and idiom. And there are many forms of sign language. If you know one sign language, you're not necessarily going to be able to communicate in another sign language. There's British Sign Language, there's Turkish Sign Language, there's French Sign Language, and there's American Sign Language. And so, again, there's various types of sign language. And so remember that just because if you have someone who comes in and they know British Sign Language, they're not going to be able to understand American Sign Language. So you need to be able to find an interpreter who understands British Sign Language. Again, it's important to look at the person that you are communicating with and not the interpreter. Always look at the deaf person who is requiring sign language interpreter. And also speak clearly and be mindful of pacing. Okay, so benefits of early sign language learning. There is a common assumption, specifically among the medical community, that if you learn sign language, it will interfere with the development of English skills, and research indicates that this is false. Early sign language exposure supports speech development in deaf and hard of hearing children. And preventing sign language use can cause language and cognitive delays, including what's known as language deprivation that hinders learning. Language deprivation is a chronic lack of full access to a natural language during the critical period of language acquisition, which is approximately the first 5 years of a child's life. And so it's important that young children, especially those that are deaf or hard of hearing, that they get exposure to sign language as early as possible. And research supports exposure to both sign language and written English for optimal development. Sign language also provides essential communication access for those unable to use spoken language, and limiting access to sign language has no scientific or ethical justification. For those who use sign language, they rely on video relay services in order to communicate with each other. And this allows deaf people who primarily prefer ASL to communicate, to use video to communicate with each other in a sign language. It's basically just having this kind of platform where we can see each other and you can see your hands and be able to communicate using sign language. And so, okay, another way in which we communicate is simply using pen and paper and using writing. That is an option, a very simple option that you can use if you have a deaf or hard of hearing patron come in again. And they will tell you if they prefer some other way of communicating after that initial interaction with pen and paper, if they prefer sign language, if they prefer captions, if they prefer something else. And so there is also some recent technological developments that I love, and they are speech-to-text apps and some new electronic devices. So the speech-to-text apps, they convert speech into text. So it's basically just a closed caption, auto-generated caption. And one of the most common ones is Live Transcribe app. It is actually developed by Google in partnership with Gallaudet University, which is the first and only liberal arts college for the deaf and hard of hearing community. And it's a free service. It's also, a lot of phones now actually have that in their accessibility settings where you can activate that. And I use it all the time. Another one is InnoCaption app. This is if the deaf person needs to make calls to like to the doctor's office. What happens is the deaf person can either speak or type, but they have a live person transcribing what the other person is saying. So if you call the doctor's office, you have the person transcribing it. You can read exactly what that person is saying at the doctor's office, if they're asking for your name, your appointment, time, all of that stuff. And then you will either speak or you will type your reply back. A lot of them, there's other services. I know that Sprint has one where, again, where the deaf person types the response to what the other person is saying, and the person transcribing the call will speak for you. And it's really interesting, especially if you like if you're a female and the person speaking for you is a male, and people are confused as to why. It's really interesting, but it's very helpful. Another app is Otter. This is a speech to text where the first they have a certain number of minutes in which you have free service from them, but eventually you have to pay. But they do allow you, unlike Live Transcribe, they allow you to save the conversation. So if you're attending a staff meeting, Otter allows you to save what was discussed in that staff meeting so that you can go back and refer to it. But it works very much like Live Transcribe. And so it's also something I've been told that if an employee requires an accommodation in which they need caption services, this is something that you can get for the employee, in which the library or the employer would pay for that subscription service for that employee to have access to, a live someone transcribe. Well, the app is auto-generated, so but they can have access to the caption, to what is being said. So that's an option as well. The electronic devices are really the first one is teletext. I was having difficulty being able to get a caption telephone, and it involved, because of the fact that I'm constantly going from one location to another, going from the back of the staff area to the reference desk to a classroom to host a program, things like that. So I needed something that was mobile. And this device is amazing at being able to, if you're a very mobile person in the workplace, to be able to communicate. It has an adapter, which you see in the photo next to the screen. And that allows you to connect to a landline phone so that you can answer phones. When you're not connected to that adapter, it will transcribe, a conversation between two people at the reference desk so that you can read what is being said. Again, this device, though, is a auto-generated captions, and it actually uses the Live Transcribe app to caption what is being said. But it is an absolute lifesaver when you need to be able to be on the desk, answer phone calls, and all of that stuff. So it is a great device. Another common device actually is UB Duo, and this is for you to communicate with patrons who are deaf or hard of hearing. And in the photo, you see it looks like a little laptop tablet device, and you are actually just typing into it, and it will automatically transfer what you typed in into the other person's device so they can read it, and then they will type in and you will read on your device what they just responded. And it's a great asset to have for communicating with deaf and hard of hearing patrons. So those are some amazing. There's more technology being created, and it can be difficult to keep up with, but those are just great devices to have for employees or patrons as well. So Another way in which before I move on, let me go back. I wanted to stress the importance to emphasize to provide options to patrons, such as being prepared to write things down and communicate with someone through written language. And it's also okay to repeat or reword something to convey or comprehend. And you can use synonyms for words that may not be heard. So that's something that some of my coworkers have done with me because I did not understand. They may have said house, and I did not understand it because the S is a high frequency sound that it can be difficult to hear. So when they, instead of saying house, they said home, I could understand what they were trying to say. So be able to use synonyms and communicating verbally with deaf and hard of hearing patrons. This is a lot of information and we have 15 minutes. So I am going to try to quickly go through this. This is a lot of information. So an interpreter is someone who interprets sign language and who does so expressively and receptively. And so when you have an interpreter, you need to, again, speak to the deaf or hard of hearing person, not the interpreter, and you need to hold comments and questions to the interpreter at the end. When you see, and then this actually happened with Casey at a staff event where there were people going up to when the interpreter is at an event, they are on the job, they are working. So do not go to the interpreter, start talking to them, start asking them questions. Do not ask to take their photo while they are on the job working with their deaf client. We've actually seen that happen. So do not do that. You can ask when it is appropriate to talk to them later when they're really not on the job, but they're there to interpret. They're there as the middle person to help this deaf person communicate. Another common way to accommodate us is through caption services or cards. Auto captions are a transcription or translation of spoken language and video content. And it's generated by speech recognition algorithm. And it's not, this compares to card services, which is a person who transcribes verbal communication live, like what is going on now, and they are more accurate than auto caption. And in the photo, I have how cart services work at live events. You have a person sitting next to, or sometimes when they have a screen available for the person, deaf people to see the screen. That's another way that it happens, but you have the person sitting there typing using that court reporter device to transcribe what is being said. And I did not know these existed until I went to an ALA event, and it meant the world to be able to see, to have live caption. And I wanted to basically, oh, I went too far ahead. I wanted to demonstrate how cart services is so much better than auto-generated captions. I know that it's very convenient to have auto-generated captions services, but it's just not accurate. If you read, these are actual screenshots of conversations that supposedly happened while at the reference desk. And I can tell you that we did not discuss Justin Bieber or a dog and kale or beady eyes, or we were not discussing coffee, which, and so reading these conversations, you really have no idea what was being discussed. Um, and it's for those of us who are deaf or hard of hearing, reading this, it just leaves us absolutely confused as to what is going on. And we kind of disassociate and just like, well, I guess I'm just not going to pay attention anymore. So it can be very off-putting. And a lot of the interpretations, how the auto generations interpret the speech is actually kind of inappropriate, very inappropriate. These are the screenshots that I could actually safely share with you. So be aware of that. And so moving on, the environment is very important, in which you like host your programs and things. You need to make sure that the rooms are well lit. So again, the person can be able to lip read, but also make sure that there is no direct lighting, such as spotlights, because the shadows make it difficult to read lips. Noise, keep outside and background noises to a minimum. Be sure that you it would not be advised to have the program in a common area where you have patrons coming in all the time, being loud. It needs to be in a separate room where you can close the door and try to keep that outside noise out. And just to be aware that most deaf people, even those with profound to severe hearing loss, there is some residual hearing because total deafness is rare. But it's usually, you just hear a sound, but you do not know what it is, or it's very muffled. Speech, just so you're aware, hearing aids and cochlear implants, they amplify sound. So shouting at deaf people does not help at all. Again, it kind of obscures the ability to lip read. And it's just, it makes the sound very loud and it can startle us. I get very easily startled by loud noises. So it's important to speak at a normal pace and tone of voice. Seating, be sure to reserve space near the speaker for the deaf and hard of hearing, and make sure it's kind of front and center of the speaker. And if you're having PowerPoints, make sure that the PowerPoint is behind or to the side of the speaker so that you can see that all within the same, line of vision. It hurts your neck when you're trying to look at the PowerPoint, but the speaker is over here and you're trying to go back and forth to see what they're talking about. And it's the same with having an ASL interpreter involved. If you're having to look at the PowerPoint and there's a speaker and then the ASL interpreter is not next to the speaker at all, it becomes, again, it takes you out of the experience of participating in a program of service. So be aware of that. Again, this allows us to better hear when we have hearing aids and implants or to lip read, as well as just be able to keep up with what's going on. So programming. The first step in creating programs is to make sure that they are accessible and in which all programs have captions and or ASL interpretation available. And you need to clearly state how patrons can make requests for accommodation. I would recommend that whenever you write the program description for any program, include a statement that says, if you need accommodations, this is how you can do that. Contact us at this, or tell us when you register what accommodations you need, something along those lines. It's also very important to hire deaf, hard of hearing staff or volunteers to lead and plan these programs. Especially important to hire deaf, native, and fluent ASL signers to teach ASL classes. This is important for two reasons. One, deaf, hard of hearing people are under and they have higher rates of underemployment and unemployment. And basically they're more qualified to present on how to teach ASL. Also, who are not deaf, native, fluent ASL signers, there's a lot of them. They're not actually using accurate ASL. They are either making up stuff because they did not actually do everything they're supposed to do to follow getting certified. And you'd be amazed at how often that happens. Again, they're just not at that level of being fluent in ASL. And so they make it difficult for the deaf person to be able to communicate because the interpreter or the person signing is not really qualified to do that. And so be aware of that when you have someone who is not deaf teaching ASL. Because again, it may not actually be ASL that they're teaching. And if you're teaching deaf, hard of hearing children something that's not actually a language, when they grow up to try to communicate with people in the deaf community, they are not going to be able to understand what is going on. They're not going to be able to communicate well with each other. And so if you're unable to find a local native ASL signer in a community, reach out to the state school for the deaf in your area and they can help you. And it may be possible to host virtual ASL classes rather than in person if you have no other option in terms of finding a deaf native speaker. Also, do not limit programs for the deaf just on topics of ASL or deaf culture and history. Like I love crafts. And it would be great to attend a crafting program in which I can be accommodated either in terms of having caption service or, even having an ASL interpreter for those that require interpreters. Or just other means of ensuring that I'm able to adequately participate in that program. So be aware of that. And I have a whole bunch of other information, but I'm going to try to get through these slides and I may revisit that if we have some extra time. Okay, so types of programs that you can host, and these are programs that a lot of these programs are things that I've actually hosted. You can have games or trivia based on deaf history or deaf culture. You can have a history related program in which you focus on a prominent event or person within deaf culture. We had a program, there's a famous resident in Texas who was deaf. He played a role in the Texas Revolution, and we had the program based on him. You can have a tour of your local school for the deaf. We had this done online, in which we had someone from the state school for the deaf presented, had a video of what the school looked like, explain what the school did, that kind of thing. So you can do that as well. Of course, ASL story times and readings, ASL classes, also deaf poetry stems and story telling programs that help the deaf person be able to share their story about themselves. Again, I'm sorry I'm going over time, but this is a lot of information. You can also have hearing health related programs this and like there's actually an increase in teenagers having hearing loss because of the earbuds that you put in your ear. It will it increases the likelihood of having hearing loss. So you can host programs for teenagers, basically explaining why you should not have earbuds in your ears all the time. And then you can also have informational programs for parents or late deafened adults that provides information on resources and services to educate them on what to expect. And I would recommend inviting both medical professionals, but especially those who identify as deaf and hard of hearing. Like I said, I was never exposed to anybody in the deaf community, and it's very important to have deaf mentors who basically give a more accurate portrayal of what it is like to be deaf, hard of hearing than what someone in the medical profession would, because lived experience is very, very important. And a lot of people in the medical profession view deafness as something that needs to be cured. And again, those who are deaf do not feel they need to be cured. They just want to be able to be given space to communicate and how they prefer and to be accommodated. You can also have deaf community meetings and events. This includes going to your local nursing home or assisted living home, because especially in rural communities, a lot of people who have disabilities, regardless of their age, they are put in nursing home. And this includes deaf people. And so it's very important to reach out to the nursing homes and to try to create a partnership with the nursing homes to have these kinds of meetings and events there as well. Again, I knew someone who was my age who was admitted in a nursing home when she was 19 years old, and she had cerebral palsy, and she's 19 years old in a nursing home. And so having these kinds of events could introduce this young person to other people their age who maybe also have the same disabilities, maybe different disabilities, but to introduce them to two people of the same age and who have similar interests and experiences. So that's important. You can also have passive programs that include reading lists, displays, and crafts. And you can base these on various observation days, including National Deaf History Month, which occurs primarily in April. And if you did not know, this month was actually created and advocated for by a retired deaf librarian, Alice Hagmeyer, who's very infamous, who's basically she's a mentor for a lot of us who are deaf librarians, deaf hard of hearing librarians, and she's a trailblazer who has done so much for the deaf community, especially deaf librarians. And so I definitely recommend looking her up, and National Deaf History Month, and it's very interesting. And again, other observance months are Deaf Awareness Month in September, Deaf Awareness Week in May, and a whole bunch of other things that you can create displays and reading lists around. Resources, there are various groups nationally that you can contact or go to their websites. They have information about deaf culture, deaf health, the health-related resources, deaf history. One of those is National Association of the Deaf. Then there's the National Deaf Center. Gallaudet University, like I said, is the first and so far only liberal arts college for deaf and hard of hearing community. They have a lot of great resources. And then there's For specifically libraries, ALA has library services for people with disabilities policy. And then the Reference and User Services Association, they have deaf, hard of hearing accessibility guidelines. There's also the Friends of Libraries for Deaf Action, where you can go and you can learn a bit more about that. They're not very active, but they have on their website information regarding deaf history, famous deaf people, things like that. And it was actually started by Alice, who created this group. And then ALA has the Bridging Deaf Cultures group, and that is for those in the library field who are deaf, hard of hearing, or allies. Anybody can be involved in it. And in the upper corner, I actually have, if you're able to go to that QR code, it will take you to where you can sign up in ALA Connect to be a member of that. There's only so far, there's two deaf culture digital libraries in Maryland and Virginia, but you can go to those and use those as resources for reading lists and things like that. There's also your state rehabilitation services office, which is part of Workforce Solutions. They are a great resource, especially you can refer patrons to them to get accommodations, to get I was able, and Casey as well, were able to receive our cochlear implant through this service. They paid for everything. And they also paid for the technology that I use, including that Teltex tablet. So that's something that I have, that's mine, that stays with me, that I can use anytime on the job. So they're a great resource. There's also a state office on deaf and hard of hearing. Most states, if not all states, are supposed to have that state office. And again, it's a great service to refer your patrons to if they need, accommodations, if they need, again, to get paid for hearing aids or cochlear implants, surgery, and things like that. I have not looked into this, but I also think that it would be a great option to ask them, are there grants or other ways that libraries can receive assistive technology through them or someone else? That way you can have that available to you. I do not know if they do that, but I think you can at least ask and see if they provide that option. So in conclusion, always include the deaf community when creating, implementing, and evaluating programs and services that impact them. There's a saying among the disabled community, nothing about us without us. And that means, again, from the very beginning, build a relationship with your local deaf community, hard of hearing community, as well as your neurodivergent community, especially those impacted with auditory sensory processing issues. Again, do not make assumptions, just ask. Just the first thing you do is ask, how do you prefer to be how do you prefer to communicate? What are your accommodations? What can we do to accommodate you and help you? And so another thing, and the reason why is because of the fact that the deaf community is very diverse. Even though Casey and I have some similar experiences, there's also some vastly different experience between us. And that's just two deaf people there. It is okay to make mistakes, but be sure that you learn from them. Even me being deaf, hard of hearing, I've made several mistakes in creating these programs, and it's a learning experience. You will continue to learn from it. The learning does not stop. And so, again, because I did not grow up in the deaf community, I went so long without accommodations. It's only within the past 5 to 6 years that I've actually received accommodations on the job. For the most part, I never had any accommodations the bulk of my life. And so receiving accommodation has been this glorious, glorious thing, and it is life changing. So keep that in mind. And rural libraries, again, I grew up in a rural library, and they have a pivotal role in connecting the deaf community to each other, as well as connecting deaf and hearing communities to each other. Again, I grew up in a rural area, and I did not know anybody else who was deaf. I did not know the first thing about looking it up. My parents did not know the first thing, but we did go to the library. And if the library had provided these services, these programs that catered to this population, I mean, again, that would have been life-changing. So just keep that in mind. And I know that there are limited resources within rural libraries and rural areas. I know that there are limited resources within rural areas, and libraries can fill those gaps. Or your libraries are at a better position to partner with local and state agencies to provide resources and information to the community. Again, rural libraries could partner with each other if you're relatively near each other. I grew up in an area where there were towns like 7 miles, 15 miles away from each other. And that was an opportunity where these libraries could have partnered with each other to build resources. And so, again, I have so much information, but if there's any questions, please let me know. You can contact both KC and I if you have any other questions about anything we presented on, or any issues that you confronted with and you would like to know more information, please contact us. We are very willing to help anyone who needs it. And again, I'm sorry I went over time, but there's so much information. So I hope that this was very helpful to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alicia, and thank you to everyone who attended today's session. Since we're over time, we're not going to have time for questions.
Okay.
So what we'll do
I see that
instead
there's a
is
question in the chat about the class was taught by a deaf instructor and specifically for using ASL in a workplace. How does this relate to your thoughts about not trying to use ASL unless you are fluent? I apologize if I was not clear. It is okay for anybody to learn ASL. It's actually very important that hearing people learn ASL so that you can be better equipped to communicate with the deaf and hard of hearing community. The issue is when you hire people who are not fluent in ASL, who are not deaf, and not native speakers. Again, because of the fact there's this equity issue. The deaf community is very much under, and they have higher rates of being under and unemployed than others. And if you allow someone who is not deaf to teach that class, again, it takes away opportunities from us. But most importantly, there's a lot of people who claim to be fluent in ASL or know ASL well enough when really they do not. They cannot adequately communicate with the deaf community. And so you do not want those people teaching ASL classes. Again, during COVID, there was a lot of controversy with people just showing up at governors and administrative offices. I think the one that comes to mind is in Florida, when the governor or a mayor was trying to give a speech about COVID to explain about, COVID restrictions and things like that. They had somebody just walk up and say, I can do ASL interpretation. And instead of looking at those qualifications, they allow that person to interpret when the deaf community was not able to understand what was going on because that person was not qualified to interpret. And this is similar with people who teach ASL. So I hope that explained that. Again, if you have any other questions or would like for me to clear up anything else that I discussed, because again, it's a lot of information, please contact us, reach out to us and let us know. But again, it is always important for I honestly think they should teach ASL as a second language in elementary. It would have been beneficial for me, but I think the earlier people learn ASL, the better, regardless of their hearing ability. But that's a personal view of mine, just because I know how helpful it is. And it's not just for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. It's very helpful for those who are autistic, nonverbal, neurodivergent, who have, sensory issues with sound. They would prefer to communicate in ASL. And so, are there any other questions?
So we don't have time for questions since we're so far over, but I do want to say thank you for this great presentation, Alicia. If anyone does have questions, feel free to either email Alicia or Casey at the emails that they provided, or you can email publicprograms@ala.org, and we will be sure to forward your questions.
And does anybody...
Can you see the captions, Alicia? Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and end it here. And thank you again for everyone who was able to attend. And Alicia, thank you again for this presentation. We will send out a link to the recording shortly after. And be on the lookout for the next speaker series for LTC grantees, which will be in about 3 months. Thank you.